Good morning. I'm Wade Rouse, the pastor here at East Brent Baptist Church. I'm so thankful that you have dropped by to watch this video. We are so thankful to be able to produce this for you. Here at East Brent, we believe that God has called us to be faithful to the Great Commission. We encapsulate that with a little slogan that just says, get right, get in, get out. Our prayer is that you are right with the Lord, involved in a local church, and out serving King Jesus. Before I let you go, I want to encourage you of the importance of being a part of a local church. Technology is great and watching sermons are wonderful, but they are not being a part of a local fellowship. If you don't have a local fellowship and you are living here in the Pensacola area, we'd love for you to visit. We meet every Sunday at 10:30 here at 4801 North Davis. If you do have a local church, then I would encourage you, be involved, be faithful, be committed. I thank you so much that you've dropped by to watch this video, and I hope that it blesses your heart. Have a great day.
Ladies, how many of you have ever been away for a few days? And you come home, and the first thing that goes through your mind before you open the door is not, I can't wait to see him, but rather, I wonder just how messed up this house is going to be. I'm out of honesty. Is there anybody else? Christy will start 48 hours before she comes home, alluding to the fact that she's going to be home in 48 hours. And that's sort of like a warning. That old cliche, when the cat's away, the mice will play. Some of that is true. So when Christy went on the mission trip, it was me and the boys. I will say that it is at least possible for a week to live a carnivorous lifestyle. It can be done. You can eat only meat. Well, we had cereal. Meat and cereal, and you can survive. But I remember about halfway when Christy's gone, I'll never tell her that this happened. But I got up middle of the night, and I started walking, and I tripped over something and the bad part is, and so I went to put my hand on the dresser, and I had junk all over the dresser, so instead of being able to grab the dresser, my hand slid this way, knocked everything off the dresser. So I went to grab over here, and when I went to grab on this side, I missed, and it was quite the comedy. Now, I'll tell you that story because that's what sin does in our life. It comes and it just clutters everything up. And if we are not intentional about the way that we live our life will get really, really, really messy. You see, you don't naturally bend towards righteousness. What we naturally do is that we bend towards sin. And I'm not talking about blatant and graphic, but I'm just talking about that type of sin where we're just not seeking the Lord. We're just going through the motions, trying to survive, get through life. Solomon writes the Proverbs because he wants to prepare his sons to be a king. And he wants to prepare his sons to live intentionally, knowing how easy it is for life to get cluttered. Now, what you'll find in the Proverbs is that there are going to be some central themes that are the really big deals, the boogeymans that we all know about. Lady Folly. We all know that from the Proverbs. We all know about how the temptation from the folks that want to pull them aside to go chase after blood, how that's there. But I would offer to you that one of the great things about the Proverbs is that the Proverbs also, it takes you to the everyday things of life. And it says we need to be intentional about those things as well. Because here's what the Proverbs teach us. You've heard me say it before, and James and I were talking this past week, and we were talking about some ministry-related things, and we started talking about another pastor that we know that has fallen. And it doesn't take long. It's usually, at this point now, it's one of two things. It's either infidelity or money. One of those two things. Proverbs have a lot to say about that. But as we were talking, one of the things that both of us just kept reiterating is that individual didn't wake up that morning and make a decision, I'm going to ruin my life. He didn't wake up that morning and was headed in this direction, and then today he said, you know what, I don't want to go that way anymore. I'm going to do a complete 180 and go against everything. No, that's not what he did. Rather, what happened is that at some point, he made a 1-degree shift. Now, you look at that and you say, 1 degree, what's the big deal? Well, if I'm going from here to where Leroy's sitting back there, 1 degree is not that big of a deal. If I'm going from here to Puerto Rico, 1 degree matters. But here's what we know about sin is that once we've taken that 1 degree shift, the next degree becomes a whole lot easier. And then before you know it, we're 90 degrees off course. And when we're 90 degrees off course, one of the things that happens is, well, I've gone so far now, I might as well just go all the way. And that's what sin does to us. And you see what Solomon does is Solomon gives the big things that are out there. Lady folly, yes. Avoid that. Be careful of that. Understand that. He talks about don't be entrapped by people that want to lead you down the path of doing some awful things. Be aware of that. But now what he does is he takes a step back and he says, let me explain to you how it's the little disciplines that if the little disciplines fail you, that's going to set you up for the major failures of life. Chapter 22 is a major change in the conversation. Verse 1 sort of serves as a preamble for the next 5 verses. And what the author wants you to think about, the question that I would ask you is when you're laying there, so fast forward. Some are closer than others, but fast forward to you're laying in the bed knowing that you are taking your last breaths here in this world. What is it that is most important to you? What is it that you value the most? Solomon says in verse 1 of chapter 22, he says, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. Chapter 22, verse 1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. And favor is better than silver or gold. I'm going to tell you a true story. 2 separate scenarios, real life. I know it because I was there. I did the funerals. Didn't happen here, so don't try to figure out who it was. One funeral. The man that had died that I was doing the funeral was fantastically wealthy. And when I say fantastically wealthy, the type of fantastically wealthy that comes from old money, if you're aware of what that means. This wasn't something that this was legacy money. This was money that had been passed down. We're talking about a man that owned thousands of acres, a man that had accomplished a whole lot in his life. Sort of. Saw one of the most interesting things. So, So did the funeral. Now, you got to understand that we've seen a transition in the way we do funerals. How many of you remember when you did the wake, typically the night before the funeral? Now, we've transitioned that now. Now, sort of the modern thing, you do it for. I'm more a fan of the modern thing. This was not. This was the old school where you had the wake visitation, 6 to 8, the night before the funeral. And so we're out at the funeral home, and I'm just sitting back observing. And I noticed that a whole lot of bigwigs came through. Owners of businesses, legislators, people that would have worked within the industry with this. But what I started to notice was that there were very few people that were there that didn't, how do I say this, have to be there. Does that make sense? Pretty much everybody was there because it was because of the dynamics of what they did for a living, pretty much had a responsibility that they had to go. Now listen, y'all are all from the South, know what I mean whenever I said they had to go show face. You get that. And they came through, and I noticed because they didn't know anybody in the family. They came through, they signed their name, they did the little, and this line was fairly large. They did the thing, they walked through, but it was really odd because usually if you go to one of these, you're typically going to shake the hand of somebody or hug somebody's neck, but they weren't there because there was any type of interpersonal relationships. They were there because they had some type of business relationship. Next day, did the funeral. None of those folks came. You know why? Because they'd already signed the registry. They had already done what their job would have necessitated them to do. But here's where it gets even sadder. I literally watched, and when I walked out, there was some few kids, some grandkids, and we've not even started the funeral nor had the processional towards the graveside. And they are already out there and have printed copies of his will and are arguing about some of the ambiguous language that's found in the will. We went and did the funeral. Here's the crazy part. There was some scattered people that were there, but I couldn't find anybody that had a real close relationship with this guy. I had another funeral. Y'all have heard me tell the story about the gentleman that he'd come up, he'd always say, he'd say, "Preacher, you don't know what it's like to grow up poor." I was so poor. Every morning, my mama gave me a cold collard green sandwich to eat. He used to tell, and I'm like, what in the world? He worked for the railroad, and he would tell me stories about riding on the railroad, and I used to even look at it like, see, so how much of that's true? He got a little older, and his family lived, and this is the only reason I know how to pronounce this word is because Oprah Winfrey is from there, Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Now let me explain something to you. If you've never been to Kosciuszko, don't get lost. Because I went through there at night, and I was fairly confident that if I somehow ran off of the road, this is how unsolved mysteries stories start. Cecil was a deacon at Thornton Road and was just an absolutely incredible dude. And I went and visited him, and then at the end, they moved him back to Montgomery. And I remember his funeral. And y'all, you couldn't find a seat. This fella had touched so many people, had reached so many people, had invested in so many people, had prayed for so many people. And I remember thinking, it's important that you figure out what's important. Because one day you're going to die. And everybody else is going to know what was important to you. And I sat there and I thought about it, and I said, you know what? Now, this fellow over here had everything that the world would say matters. Now, this is harsh, what I'm about to say. But people cared about him not because of him, but because of what he might give them. And then there was Cecil. And people cared about him because of him. Because he had sacrificially given and loved and cared for so many years. It's funny that the way that Solomon starts this next thought is that he says, having a good name is to be chosen. I want you to notice two things there. The first is a good name. We don't use words like this anymore. I'll be curious if anybody is aware or is familiar with this word, but we used to use a word called gravitas. And the idea of gravitas comes to us from a long time ago in a galaxy far away. But the idea is that because of the sheer nature of a man's character, like gravity, he pulls people to himself. Because of his integrity, because of his virtue, because of who he is, he pulls people to himself. And this word here, a good name, that's what it carries with it the significance of. It's a name of integrity. It's a name that matters. One of the things that we within our culture that I would say I don't think is necessarily a good thing is that we have lost some of the shame of poor behavior. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. There was a time in which if you went out and acted a fool, it was shameful to go out and act a fool. And now we've lost much of the shame that goes along with poor behavior. Well, with that means that there's no longer a pull and a draw for people to live the right way so that they may be seen as people with integrity. But I want you to see the second part. Notice that it says is to be chosen. You see, the reality is that this is a decision that we make. Do we want to be people that chase after silver and gold? Or do we want to be people who chase after integrity? Now, I need to pause here and tell you that be careful that you don't put into the words of Solomon things that he didn't say. Solomon never said that silver and gold is bad. Solomon said that silver and gold, if that is your ultimate objective, if that's why you live life, then silver and gold is an idol. But rather, what really matters is to choose to chase after being a person of character, being a person of integrity, being a person that has virtue. And if you're that type of person, then what happens is that you have something that's greater than silver and gold. You say, what's greater than silver and gold? Now, I would never tell you to do this, but I have heard it said before. Imagine that you could hear what's being said when you're laying there in the coffin. Live a life so that at that moment you'd be thankful for the things that people say about you. You see, you can live a life where you accumulate a lot of stuff. And you know what happens to the stuff after you're gone? Goes to the next person. You know what happens when you're a person of good name? Here's what the New Testament tells us. Even though dead, they still speak. You see, we use tomorrow. It's not accidental that we use this title. What do we call our senior adult ministry here? Legacy Life. Why don't we call it that? Think about it. Because we want our life to leave a legacy. Leave something behind. Something that matters. First thing here is to seek the legacy of a good name. Verse 2 is a really interesting verse, especially when you put it into the context of all of the things that are about to be said. And I think that it's important that it's put where it is. Because verse 2 tells us that the image of God is in every single person. Now, what's about to happen is that Solomon is going to make some really strong comparables. And in those comparables, he's going to show that making good decisions that honor the Lord, decisions that please the Lord, making good decisions is going to put one on a certain trajectory. Now, once again, Proverbs is not a genie in a bottle that says, do this, get this. It's a general principle. But if you live a certain way, you can expect certain consequences and results. And then he's going to show on the other side of that those that choose to live according to their human flesh, to their passions. And what happens is that those who live according to their passions, well, they're going to get exactly what it is that they set out to get. The end result that they receive is the Lord allows them to have their heart's desire, which is things of this world. But it's interesting that in verse 2, we find out that the Lord and his image is in everyone, whether they choose and whether they walk the path of righteousness or whether they walk the path of unrighteousness. Now, I think this is important because I think that it's a reminder to us that every single person that we come into contact with is someone that's made in the image of God, someone that has value, someone that has dignity, someone that deserves to be treated as such. You say, well, you don't know the mistakes that they've made. And I would respond with, there but by the grace of God, go we. But we have a responsibility to see every single person made in the image of God. The rich and the poor meet together. And the Lord is the maker of them all. So our first two things is that we're called to seek the legacy of a good name. To see that God's image is in every human being. In verse 3, we see the battle between prudence and foolishness. The prudent sees danger and hides himself. But the simple go on and suffer for it. Prudence is a great word, a word that we would benefit tremendously from bringing back. Prudence carries with it the idea of wisdom, not only in decision making, but wisdom in observation. So I want you to think about this. Imagine this past summer, for Solomon, 2 summers ago, for Solomon's 16th birthday, we drive across the country. And there's this huge tourist trap. That's this great hole in the dirt. If you've never been there, it's called the Grand Canyon. Now listen, I want you to understand something. I'm a firm believer in the laws of gravity. I think they're true. I have no doubts. There may or may not be a video that people will never see that I have been on our sanctuary roof one time, not twice, one time. I will never go back up there again. But if you've not been to the Grand Canyon, and most of you probably have, you drive and you drive and you drive and you get like some of the like mini glimpses as you're driving there. You don't get the whole shebang, but you get some of the, you're like, wait, I don't want to drive off that. But then when you get to the top, you get there and, it's touristy and all this stuff, and, they're selling ice cream. But then you walk around and listen, it's hard to prepare for what you experience whenever you walk out there. And yes. And I remember when we were out there, and my first response is I'm walking. Now, I'm about from me to Scott here. And my knees are already getting weak. And Saul's like, let's go look, Dad. I'm like, son, I don't know that I can move. And we walked a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And I'm like, yep, this is it. And I slowly start moving forward. Well, these little college things, there's about 9 or 10 of them. And they're just running along here. And all I can think about is I'm going to be on the news. And then all that's going through my mind, and my mind, y'all know it's messed up, is a video that I saw one time. Have y'all ever seen these little, are they called Matterhorn sheep? Is that what they're called? But the sheep that somehow or another can get off of the ledges. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And I'm watching on the Discovery Channel one day, and there's these, I don't know if it was a bobcat or something. And it's like up there, and these sheep are like right here, and all of a sudden, you see the bobcat moves, and the sheep are like, maybe we're going to get to leave here. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere comes this big old bear. And then the bear, he looks down. And I realized that bears have a little bit of intelligence. Because the bear said, not worth it. But then the bobcat came back. And the bobcat somehow or another got itself on a little ledge. And it shriveled up to hide. And at some point, one of these little cliff sheep thought maybe it's safe. And it starts to come up, and when it does, bobcat pops up. And when the bobcat pops up, cliff sheep goes, uh-oh. It commences to jump from one place to the other. And the bobcat, in a split-second decision, questioned everything about life. He reached out and tried to grab the sheep. The sheep's twice as big as it. And all of a sudden, all you see, boom, boom, boom. Now, I tell you that's what's going through my mind when these kids are just running across here. One of the things that defines a person of wisdom is that they have the ability to recognize and see reality within their surroundings. one of the things that is a definitive staple of a simpleton or as someone who is foolish is that they literally do cartwheels through life, not paying attention to the world around them. And unfortunately, the simple go on and they suffer for it. Now, maybe the illustration to use here is not a bobcat trying to catch a cliff sheep. But how many of us has known somebody that always had found that next big financial thing? They're going to invest in it, man, they're going to make their millions. And they throw it all away. How many of us have seen that person that it just knows the next time I go to the casino, I'm going to strike it big? You see, part of wisdom is realizing the world that we live in and realizing how the world that we live in works. It's broken. And we have a responsibility to live with prudence in a broken world. Number 4, understanding humility. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. This is a really kind of cool verse, but also one that forces you to think a little bit. So now here's what I've got for you as a project. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home tonight, and between now and Sunday, I want you to come up with a way that you're going to show everyone that you have learned how to be humble. And then display it. Humility is a weird thing, isn't it? Humility is not necessarily something that we reach out and catch, but rather we chase after something else, and the end result is that we get humility. Notice that humility and the fear of the Lord are coupled together. If you're going to try to define humility, do you realize it is one of the hardest words in the English language to define? Right up there next to objective pollster. That's funny. But if you're going to define humility, how do you define it? Because the problem is that all too often our definitions of humility is really more of a man-made definition of false humility than it is real humility. I know some people who are the most prideful people that I have ever met in their attempts to show you just how humble they are. So what is humility? Well, humility and the fear of the Lord are coupled, and the reason that they're coupled is because what humility is the recognition that every good thing that we have, it isn't ours. Everything that we have is a gift of grace. Everything that we have also is a responsibility of stewardship. Humility comes from getting the right perspective of the world, the right perspective of God, and then you having the right orientation of the world towards God. Humility is not if you are an exceptional builder saying, I'm really not all that good. Humility is the recognition that the Lord has blessed you with the ability to build beautiful things. And you do it for the glory of the Lord. Martin Luther once said, do you know what a cobbler? Now listen, I had to teach my kids because I said this to them one time in our family devotions. And I'm here quoting Martin Luther, and he says, you know what a cobbler should aim to do? And Zaya looked at me and said, well, don't make it peach, make it cherry. No, kid, that's not what that means. But Dad, I don't like peach. I said, and his mama had to explain to him that a cobbler makes shoes. A cobbler's aim should be to make the best shoes that he can. Humility is not a false sense of, I don't have this ability. Humility is a recognition of where the ability comes from and then treating the ability with good and proper stewardship. And notice that he says here that the result, and he couples these three things together. It's a triplet: riches and honor and life. And once again, this is not a guarantee. It's a general principle. Now let me get in very quickly. I want to get to verse 5 so we can pick up in verse 6 next week. I'm reading out of the ESV, and it reads, thorns and snares are in the way of the crooked. Now, does anybody have traps there? Did your translation have traps? Anybody? Out of curiosity? All right. I probably would translate it traps. Snares works, although it's just most of us not familiar with snares. Here's what the idea is. The idea is that stupid people are going to do stupid things. Now think about this for a second. Imagine that this was some former battlefield. And I were to tell you that buried underneath the dirt are landmines. And if you step on them, they're going to explode. It would be prudent. It would be wise. It would be smart for you to, before you just take off and sprint across there, to stop for a minute and say, what should I do here? Well, what would be the wisest course of action? Maybe the word that's used here is, how might I guard myself from blowing up? Because that would be a bad day. Here's what we have to realize, and that the psalmist and what we see in the Proverbs, what you see in Ecclesiastes, what you see throughout wisdom literature, is that wisdom literature in the Old Testament is built on the foundation that we live in a broken world. And within this broken world, God's covenant people are not to live with the illusion that it's not broken, but to live with the reality that it is, but to live with wisdom, making the best decisions and guarding the most important things. Now, you can find anything on YouTube. One of the things that I always find most hilarious is they find these sound bites, and I don't know how they accomplish them, but these people exist. And they find these sound bites of just some of the most ridiculous statements. And I remember seeing this one of an apartment caught on fire. And they got this girl outside, and they were like, "What did you do?" And she says, "Well, I was scared. And I knew that I only had a minute to get myself out." And they said, "So what did you do?" He said, "Well, I thought for a second, and I knew that I had in this moment to also, I had a second to think about getting the most valuable things out." And they said, "Well, what did you get?" And she said, "Well, all I could think of at the moment is it was early and I hadn't done my hair yet, so I brought my curling iron." True story. Saw another one. Same situation. What did you get? She said, well, listen, my brain just was going, and I was hungry. So I brought my Fruity Pebbles. On a more serious level, how many of you play chess? If you play chess, how wise is it? First off, don't be the idiot that makes one move and then brings out your queen. I mean, seriously, if you're going to, just don't. That's free. Don't do that. Don't ever, it's over. If you're going to play chess, you better guard the queen. You got to guard the most valuable things. But unfortunately, how many believers, they take the most valuable thing and they just leave it completely unguarded? Let me tell you how that happens. Sunday morning happens. And it was an awful day. You're a Florida State fan. Saturday was bad, or you're an Auburn fan. Saturday was bad. Or, you know, you just don't like to get up in the morning. And the alarm goes off, and you hit snooze. Can I tell you one of the best, most practical, wisest things that you can do in your life? Throw away a snooze button. That's free. But Sunday morning rolls around, and I'm just not feeling it today. Just not feeling it today. You know what? Our church, since COVID, we live stream, so we'll watch it on live stream. Now hear me in what I'm about to say, because I'm not a fan of some of the way that technology gets used. I get it. We live in a world. I get it. But follow me. Best of intentions. Oh yeah, I'm just not going to go to church today. I'll watch it on live stream. 10:30 comes around, and you haven't gotten out of your pajamas. And you turn it on there, and the sound's not good, or it's buffering a little bit, or you want some Fruity Pebbles. And you watch 5, 10, 15 minutes of it. And by the way, we know there's a record. We may not you, but we know, because here's the deal. Don't let churches lie to you too, by the way. Can I tell you just how disgusted I get when churches start talking about their numbers and they count their online activity, and then you go and don't realize that you can actually check their analytics and find out that the average stay on the website is 7 seconds? But you know what happens the next Sunday? You don't even worry about the live stream. You know what happens the next Sunday? You don't even think about the church. You know what happens 6 weeks later? The Bible that the church said you needed to bring, and at least once a week there was some accountability that told you about the important things of life. The Bible that used to sit there has now been relegated to another place because you've got something else that's in its place. You know what happens about a year from there? Well, a year from there, it's no longer anything that you even think about. You know what happens 10 years from now? And here's where it hurts. Your culture of saying what is important has now become your lifestyle, and it has been passed down to the next generation. It's interesting here that he closes this up and he says, Thorns and snares are in the way of the crooked. Oh, and by the way, how many times have y'all heard me say people don't realize how much they need the church until they need the church? Life's going to happen. There are thorns and there are snares out there. And if you or someone that is not guarding your soul, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be the foolish person that walks right into them. But the Bible says that whoever guards his soul will keep far from them. I'll finish up by telling you what I tell our students. There's two ways that you can look at questions of right and wrong. I learned this from the great evangelist of morality, Jerry Clower himself. Jerry Clower says that if there's a cliff, and you know that what's on the other side of the cliff is wrong, then you might not want to see just how close you can get to the edge of the cliff without falling off. The prudent thing may be to say, you know what? There's a cliff there, and I'm not going to go anywhere near it. That is what it means to guard your soul. Lord, thank you.
Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that God's word has communicated truth to you, and I pray through the power of the Holy Spirit that your life will be changed. If there's anything that we can do or questions that we can answer, please reach out to us. You can email us at info@esprint.com. We pray that God will work in your life, and we pray that you will be blessed immensely. Thank you for stopping by. God bless.